U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a minimum of 10% tariff on all imports. In addition, he's imposing even higher taxes on goods from about 60 countries in a sharp escalation of an escalating global trade war. Mike Hanna has the latest from the White House.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day.
This was framed by the White House as a celebration. Guests invited to the Rose Garden for what the U.S. president has termed Liberation Day. Using emergency powers, he's imposing a baseline tariff of 10% on imports from all countries.
Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore.
This is described as an emergency, not a negotiation, so individual countries will not be able to make a deal before the tariffs come into effect. The president is also introducing what he calls reciprocal tariffs against dozens of other countries. The figure for each based on roughly 50% of the tariffs the president says they already place on U.S. goods. There will be a 34% tariff on goods from China, 30% on those from South Africa, and 20% on goods from the European Union.
European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
In addition to all this, the president also announced a tariff of 25% on all imported automobiles. These unprecedented steps could have global consequences from which the US may not be excluded. At the beginning of the year, the probability of a recession within the United States was put at some 20%. This increased over the past week of tariff talks to close to 34%. Following the announcements made in the Rose Garden, the probability of a recession within the United States is likely to increase even further. President Trump says everybody will remember this event as the day he made America wealthy again. But with the consequences of his actions still unclear, it could be remembered for more somber reasons. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
Let's also go to Fadi Salameh in Tokyo. Fadi, Japan's benchmark stock index in Nikkei was down by 4% in early trading. What else are you hearing when it comes to reaction to the tariffs?
Well, what we hear from market sources that they are still trying to swallow this big news here in Japan. During Trump's first term, he implemented tariffs, extra tariffs and additional tariffs on several trade partners, but at that time he exempted Japan, and the politicians here, of course on the top of them is Prime Minister Shigeru Takeshita, was hoping that the US would exempt Japan this time also, but that didn't happen. Japan is number 5 on the list that Mr. Trump showed in the White House. They are implementing 24% on tariffs on all Japanese products. That's a big increase in That's a big increase in the tariffs for Japan. Already, the U.S. is implementing almost 2.5% on Japanese cars being exported to the U.S. And now with another 25% that has been announced a couple of days ago, that means that the Japanese cars are going to be taxed for 27.5%. That's a very huge increase. And at the time where the competition is very harsh and very hard, this is a very big and bad news for Japanese manufacturers. As you know, Japanese car industry is the second largest industry besides the electronics, besides the electronics products. So it's a huge impact on the Japanese markets. Many of Japanese also analysts now are trying to think about what could Japan do as a countermeasure against these procedures and these tariffs. Japan doesn't import almost none of the U.S. cars, so and the tax on the US and American cars in Japan is almost zero. So basically they couldn't implement any countermeasure in that field. But other than that, maybe we could see, as I saw one of the analysts who was talking to the Japanese media, he was talking about the Japanese makers stopping or pausing their plans to build the new factories in the U.S. They have been promised with big, the U.S. has been promised with big investments by Mr. Shigeru Ishiba when he met Mr. Trump last month, billions of dollars of investments that could be stopped as a countermeasure until the Japanese politicians are able to talk again with Mr. Trump and maybe get a special exemption, taking into consideration that Japan is U.S. largest and most important ally in the East Asia region. Yes.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Fadi Salameh live for us in Tokyo. Thanks so much, Fadi. Seijiro Takeshita is a professor of management and information of innovation at the University of Shizuoka in Japan. He's an international business specialist, and he joins us from Shizuoka. Seijiro, we're already seeing the reaction to this tariff announcement when it comes to Asian markets. What other impacts do you think this will have?
Well, it's a global one. Firstly, for Japan, we have 20% of exports to the U.S., but what we're really worried about is the ongoing, I would say, tsunami type of effect after this earthquake. In other words, the global implication to this. Obviously, U.S. might fall into stagflation with the increased inflation because of this, retaliatory issues that many countries will conduct. And obviously, eventually what you'll be seeing is demand decline. And that would cause a lot of serious effect on stagflation in the States, which basically would swirl around the world without any speck of doubt, which would bring down the whole economic growth perspective. Now, that's what the Japanese are really worried about. Another thing that we should really think about, especially the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese, is that, he's playing the cards not only on trade. This is where we have to be very careful about. He's basically trying to utilize a card of security as well, bringing in, these trade talks. So, for example, in case of Japan, they're bringing in talks like, rice issue, which is a very political sensitive issue here in Japan. And as we face the upper house election in summertime, the LDP, the governing body of Japan, would certainly not want to bring that into agenda. So, they're playing cards in a much wider spectrum rather than just trade.
Seijiro, I want to speak to you a little bit more specifically about Japan's potential reaction to these tariffs going forward. Japanese automobiles are a key export to the U.S. Imported cars will now be hit with a 25% tariff. What might we see Japan do when it comes to potential countermeasures?
There aren't much countermeasures politically or geopolitically that Japan can make. The only way that, for example, manufacturers can cope is basically to transfer a lot of production, as you just noted by your reporter, to the U.S. to mitigate, this frustration that the American authorities are having. But, of course, that really isn't going to be the resolution in total basis. In my personal opinion, and we have to wait 4 more years, in my opinion, for the American public to start understanding that, this whole scheme is going to hurt them the most at the end of the day and is going to bring, the free world alliance into a crumble. It will take time, but unfortunately, I guess people have to go through the pain and understand the consequences of these actions.
Seijiro, Japan, China, and South Korea are looking to develop stronger economic ties due to these U.S. tariffs. What would that realistically look like? I mean, from your vantage point, could a move like this be some type of a catalyst to a new status quo in Asian trade markets?
Very much so, and that's the danger point as well. It's a good question because what we're seeing is hegemony war between the United States and China, i.e. between the free world and also unitarian states. And do Japan want to side with the latter? Definitely not, because we're living on free trade. So this is where a very difficult balance is being asked for countries like Japan, where we're under the umbrella and security of the United States, but now they're bringing that card to the trade issues, which I think is, well, for a lot of Japanese, feel very unreasonable, pain that we have to endure for the next 4 years.
And Seijiro, what kind of response should be expected when it comes to other countries in Asia? I mean, will more countries retaliate? Will some take a step back going forward? Do more countries now feel that they have to stand up to Trump?
Those that are under the umbrella of U.S. securities, they cannot really make too much of a strong negotiation, as you can imagine. So, countries like Japan, for example, would have a very difficult time making a one-on-one hard, negotiation in the United States. Because again, I go back to the point that this isn't only on trade, it involves security issues as well. So, for the countries that can make their voice, that's fine. But for those who can't, they would have to swallow a lot of negativity from the U.S., which I think is very, very unreasonable and would leave a scar, going forward, decades ahead.
All right, Seijiro Takeshita, Professor of Management, Information of Innovation at the University of Shizuoka in Japan. Thanks so much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Great to get your perspective.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.